Hi, and welcome back to the same session. I'm Gianluca Fiorelli, and today we are going to have a very special guest. This person is reading from her LinkedIn MSBA. She's served in strategic initiatives in intelligence, AI, and automation, so perfect for our podcast. And she also a women ERG leader, analyst, engineer, board member, mentor, and actually she is working at LinkedIn as a manager strategic initiative and intelligence central operation. I'm going to ask her precisely what all this big definition means. Anyway, this is a big honor for me to have this guest today with us, and she is Michelle Robbins. Hey, Michelle, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Gianluca. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm fine. It's still very warm here in Valencia.
Well,
I think that it's so. You're right. You're living in on the Pacific coast, right?
yes, I'm in
So
Los
we
Angeles.
should have
Yeah,
somehow a similar climate.
a little bit. It's starting to pretend to be fall, I think. It's starting to get a little gray in the mornings. We've got the overcast coming in from the ocean. So I think it's starting to cool
Oh
down
yeah, this
finally
is the
here.
big difference. You have the ocean and I have the Mediterranean, so it's even
Ah,
more
yeah,
temperate.
yeah.
So yes, before when I was presenting you, manager strategic initiative and intelligence. In plain English, what does it mean? What do
Uh,
you exactly do at LinkedIn?
So I sit within the broader Central Ops organization, and that's part of the Global Business Organization. So what you're probably most familiar with about LinkedIn is the product itself, the
Yes.
flagship product, consumer facing, business facing. Central Ops supports all of our business teams. So it's the business end of the business. That
Hmm.
makes sense, not the product end. And so we work across sales op, go to market ops, customer support, all of those types of teams. And we are horizontal across those functions. And so the team that I work with in particular is our AI and automation team and supporting efforts to basically find areas of opportunity where we can streamline our business processes to make our sales and customer support people more productive, more efficient, provide better support for all of our customers by essentially automating the work that can be automated, I guess.
Okay, cool. I will ask you something about this specifically, but before, just to break the ice, you are in the past years, actually, even before AI was a cool things to talk about. You were really pointing the finger in that direction. So, how AI is treating you lately?
AI is keeping me extremely busy. I think as it's keeping all of us really busy. And to your point, I have been in this space and thinking about this space for a very long time. The first time I ever did a presentation about AI coming into digital marketing and really starting to change things was in 2014, where I talked about the implications of Google's acquisition of DeepMind and how they were starting to basically acquire and hire all of the AI and machine learning researchers into that organization. So it's something that I've been tracking and following for over a decade now. And as I have done so, my focus is always with an eye to what are the implications of this, right? Not just with how we're working, but with society more broadly, understanding how this is going to change consumer behavior, how it's going to change all of our behaviors. So I've been less focused, but very concerned about the impact to the environment as well. Most of what I focus on is what are the larger implications to how this changes how we work and how we relate to one another.
Yeah, yes, and I remember your talks about that specific talk. I remember it well, and I also remember one that you did. And as our listeners and viewers can understand, you are a really good fan of pop culture from
Yeah.
the Wonder Woman and Superman frame behind you. And one the series that I remember that you like, and this is making you very similar to others friends I have, is Battlestar Galactica. And I remember one presentation that you did where you were using the very famous last phrase of Battlestar Galactica in the last episode. And now, obviously, I don't remember it literally, but it was something about the cycle of the returning cycle of history. So also you were referring in the marketing in this case,
Yeah.
history.
All
So
of this has happened before. All of it will happen
exactly.
again.
And now that, for instance, and I think it's perfect, especially now, because, for instance, now that are in the little world of SEO, but we make it big, but it's a little word. We are saying, no, now click are fading, or what is important is visibility. And then people start to rediscover what marketers were doing before search, before click attribution, and so on. So that phrase of
Yeah.
Battlestar Galactic
I mean,
seems
I think it's
very
interesting.
well fitting.
Yeah. Yeah. So, something this has actually been a through line throughout my career in the industry, right? Which was started quite some time ago. Going to age myself, so I'm not going to give the year, but been around a while in search and digital marketing and technology in general. And my background was engineering and product development and development. So when I joined the search industry at large via Search Engine Land Search Marketing Expo and running all the technology for those properties, what always struck me at our events was when folks would be on stage and speak about SEO as if it's something entirely new and entirely different and not like anything that's ever happened before. And mainstream marketers won't understand it. Only this tiny industry understands it. And I thought that I've always thought that was wrong, right? I've always thought that building a brand is building a brand, and how you acquire an audience will change as the channels change and platforms change and audience behavior changes, but the fundamentals of how you reach your audience has never changed. And brands were built for a century before we had the internet. Brands will continue to be built with every new iteration and every new technology change as well, because again, the fundamentals don't really change. So with this shift to AI now and everybody focusing on how the AI chat interfaces are a completely different thing than SEO or something new or different, I maintain it's not. It's always been about building a brand. It's always been about meeting your customers where they are with a message that will resonate across any platform, any surface. Billboards still work, commercials still work, adverts in the tube still work. It's just one new channel.
I totally agree also because with my almost 10 years of experience working in television, I mean, I always pay attention of how advertisement works, especially in television. And I think that, for instance, it's some specific type of ads. Many famous internet company brands, especially in the travel industry, I think of Booking, Trivago, they were always very smart to buy the space before weathercast and all this kind of very big exposition placement for a TV advertisement. Because yes, that's what at the end of the day is helping you creating your brand. Because without doing that kind of things, Booking would be an exact match to me, not brand.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I just think it's understanding a lot of it goes to understanding human behavior and how humans absorb information and where they are versus where you believe they are, right? I sometimes think that marketers spend a lot of time trying to complicate a thing that's not that complicated, right? And try to say, no, but this is uniquely different. This is entirely different from this over here. And it's like, I don't see that they are. I think a channel and a medium and a platform is different, but fundamentally what you're doing is getting your brand in front of a potential customer. Like that's the game, right?
Yeah, yes. And I think that sometimes when you were saying overcomplicating, and I don't want to be to sound it as a critic to also friends that are really, really deep into this kind of knowledge. Sometimes, for instance, okay, it's true we want to understand. We are like little kids sometimes that break everything to understand how something is work. But what I fear that sometimes we spend too much in breaking things than in actually playing with the thing. So when you were saying we should start reconnecting and knowing how people, how the customers, which are people, think, search, behave, etc., 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 it's coming to my mind something that you were also saying, I think, on LinkedIn about the role of humanities, so the soft skill, but especially maybe humanities also in terms of knowledge of something for us. For instance, let's say LLMs are really based on natural language processing, but maybe if you try to be curious about linguistic in general, how people talk, why people talk in a way, how different people talk in a situation than and another, maybe some very complicated things that can seem very complicated, you start to see, okay, because this doing that and that doing this come easier to understand.
Yeah, I think it gets to how over the past couple of decades, everything with respect to technology was focused on everyone should learn how to code, everyone should be an engineer, everyone should focus over here. And what got left behind was focusing on psychology and consumer behavior. And like you mentioned, linguistics, which right now, that's really the game, right? So these chat interfaces are, like you said, natural language processing. So if you've spent all of your time focusing on the technology instead of on how users interact with the technology and how users are going to be searching what their language is, how they behave even with these chatbots, then you're already behind. Because, and this is something that I've seen the industry at large, and again, we have the same friends, some incredibly smart people doing incredibly great work, but the emphasis has always been on trying to figure out how Google's behaving instead of how your users are behaving, instead of how your users are searching for things. And that's a very broad brush, right? People are also focused on that. It's just that I think what rises to the top in the discussions tends to be a lot more about reverse engineering Google's algorithm or something like that, instead of reverse engineering how you can reach people where they are, what the psychology around the user behavior is, and how it differs in context. So I guess that's what I'm seeing. And I think that if we take that same approach with the AI tools, then you're just gonna, it's like I said, all of this has happened before, all of it will happen again. I see a lot of really smart people focusing on the technology behind the tool instead of, again, thinking about how do you build a brand within these tools.
Yes, and I think that also knowing this kind of, let's call it humanistic, having this kind of humanistic knowledge can make understand, because ultimately what these channel like Google, like ChatGPT, etc., want to do, they want, especially now with AI, we want to mimic how we conversate, how we reason, how we decide something. So if we know the mechanism that humans have, we can try to understand the mechanism that they try to imitate. And so we can create something, for instance, how to be persuasive, both to the final user and the user, the agent that want to mimic the user. So it's a substrate of knowledge that it can reinforce the validity of also the technical reverse engineer that you are doing.
Yeah, I think in a way, the folks in our business, in SEO in particular, are best suited to get the best information out of the models because we've spent our careers understanding how to search, how to get the best out of search, right? And so, really understanding like what a really good prompt is a big unlock in your own personal utilization of these tools and getting the best information out. On the other hand, do we believe that the consumers at large also behave this way with these machines? I don't know, right? Have they figured out how to get the best information out and how to create the best prompts? Or are they more casual about it, sort of like in a chat to a friend? I think that we have to understand that these new tools really broaden the aperture of what utilization is going to look like. I think there's going to be a big difference across demographics, across regions, meaning geo regions, across intents. I think it's going to be, I think in a way, it makes the job a little bit harder because the information that we were always given from the search engines, like it gave us a lot of like what that is, what keywords are people coming to, what phrases are being used, things like that. We've had a way to get at that. I think that's going to just be a lot harder to understand with the with these LLMs. And so I think trying to focus on, again, the reverse engineering and figuring that out, instead of focusing on what can we understand about user interaction, instead of focusing on machine learning at this point. And trust me, I've studied this, and so it's weird for me to say it, but for the application of what marketers are trying to do, I think going back and understanding user behavior, consumer behavior, and psychology is a much better way to spend time than trying to figure out how to tune a model, for example. If that's not what you really need, if you really need to acquire customers, you need to understand how are the customers using these things, not how are the companies developing these things.
Yes, in fact, if I would have to suggest one specific field of study right now would be social linguistic, because it's the perfect combination of sociology, so how people behave, and how people transmit and communicate a need or something. But let's move to, we have talked about us as practitioner, but let's move to the other part, very free part, the practitioner, the user. But let's talk also about the businesses. So in your work, you were saying that you are relating a lot with business company. Let's say after the first very huge, big hype that maybe is still there about the eruption of AI, what are you seeing in the perception of the importance of AI after, let's say, 1 year and a half to 2 years that AI started to be such a pressure on businesses? They moved from a big hype and maybe worries to a more mature and considered need knowledge that they need to integrate AI in the workflow, or also some, as sometimes happens to read also in the news, some sort of disillusion with the potentiality of AI.
Yeah. So I think it's important to separate out AI from generative AI, and AI in particular, just talking about machine learning algorithms. And those have been in use across businesses for a very long time. They're not new, right? So we've had automated processes, RPA, robotic process automation, things along those lines in industry and across businesses for a long time. The change is the generative AI and the chatbots, right? That really focus more on enabling access to knowledge. And that's a huge unlock across organizations that are large and complex and have a lot of data and a lot of documentation, for example. There are a lot of use cases for using a chat interface to access that kind of information. And the critical point, I think, is that so many businesses are like, what do we do with this? Where do we start? Because it does sound like a really big thing to take on if you're just focused on how do we use this massive LLM. And an analogy I like to use a lot is that you don't need to take a monster truck to go grocery shopping, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's important to narrow down what is the problem you're trying to solve and what is the best tool for that. And does it need to be something that is LLM based, or do you just need to develop a machine learning algorithm to handle this process and change a system somewhere? I think it's really important to understand the differences in where the levers are because of the complexity as well as the potential risk. Because again, when you throw an LLM into the mix, it's important and this is something I've been saying for years, they're prediction machines, they're not fact machines. And so at every output, there's a level of predicting this is the best output for this query. So you also have to kind of consider what is the risk of a model outputting incorrect data in this given process, and evaluate that risk against the benefit of having included that in that chain of that process. So I think it takes a lot of evaluation of risk and reward, the best tool for the job, as well as understanding, is your enterprise set up? Is your business set up to even onboard something like this? Because that requires a lot of really good data foundations, because the data is everything here, right? You can take a model and fine tune it for your particular data and business use case. But if your data is not well structured, is not consistent across your organization, this is where things kind of start to get tripped up. Also, when you talk about knowledge-based data, documents, I don't know how you are, but I have found throughout my career that documentation tends to be the last thing to be created in any given process or any given thing. A lot of times information lives in subject matter experts' heads only. And so not only is it a matter of getting that information into a document, but then you have to look at what is the structure of your documents. And this is something that is part and parcel to daily for SEOs, right? Understanding schema and
Yeah,
things like that, and the importance of well-structured data and information. So you can't just kind of go like, AI is here and now we're going to do AI, right? There's a lot of planning and use case development and really evaluating what is the right thing for this given piece that
yeah.
we want to integrate. But I think
I,
there's a lot of value there.
yes, yes. And I was smiling, and somehow I tried to contain my laughing because I have a personal case where substantially the knowledge base was one physical engineer, and he was substantially the Wikipedia of the company. My very first 3 months of work with this client was me having very long video call with the engineer, trying to systematize all his knowledge into something because I was recording and from recording using AI for transcribing everything he was saying. So it was like an anthropologist interrogating someone in Papua New Guinea. And that was really incredible because, yes, I think that you were saying the knowledge base is fundamental. Sometimes you can find so beautiful, valuable, golden nuggets in terms of content that should be on the web, for instance, instead of a PDF store in an archive. But also that from there, I usually am from a 1 year now, I'm really working into knowledge graph because I think that at the end of the day, it's the best way also as a tool for then doing everything else. And also because I find that it's maybe the easiest way to start putting a very strong fit into everything going to be agentic.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. That's the right path. Absolutely. But as you start looking at those knowledge bases and that information, something that we've seen even, especially you have to look at the size of an organization, but think about things like acronyms. Acronyms are everywhere, right? But what does that acronym in a given context mean something else in another context, right? Or is it used consistently across an organization? And imagine somebody like interacting with a bot, asking about something, using an acronym, and then getting served something that's like completely wrong and not related. And the problem with that, because then you can ask it again and define the acronym, and that's fine. But the more that people interact with tools like that and get wrong information back, the less confident they are that these tools are robust and have utility. And that's unfortunate because they do, right? It's just that they output what they're given as input. And obviously there is prediction and other things that are happening at the same time, but usually not that it's not that the machines don't know what they're doing. It's that it's what they're working with, right? It's the data that they're working with. And that's why if you're going to roll out an AI initiative in your company, the first question, is, well, what is the use case? Is it an appropriate use case for AI? And then the next question has to be like, what does our data look like? And is it ready? Because probably the larger part of an AI initiative is going to be that foundational building of the data sources and documents.
Yes, and then now I'm remembering, I think it was around 2018, another talk you gave, and you were already stressing about just about machine learning, not everything LLMs, but the foundation substantially. You were saying that maybe the most important thing was governance, in the sense of the one of the most important roles would have become the controller of the data. So because if the data is biased, for instance, or is wrong, literally wrong, then everything for smarter and wonderful AI model you're using, the output is going to be biased or wrong. So the
Well, and you
problem
have to
is
also
that,
think. how data changes over time, right?
Yes,
So
and
data drift
this
is a
is
real
also
challenge as well.
yes, this is also what I am stressing about when with clients I'm creating knowledge graph. It's the fact is you're right. I mean, the knowledge graph is like a living library. It's not something that you create and then
Yeah.
forget it. But for instance, new products must enter in the knowledge graph.
Yeah.
New links, because if you include the link graph into a knowledge graph, new links must be added. New way of referring to your products or to products in general by the people. You should put them with all these calls, partially match, strong my related match, etc., etc. You must make this knowledge graph live. So yes,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
somehow the forgotten part of the big work that must be done.
Yeah, it's the less interesting part. That's the challenge, right? It's like one of my professors in the master's program that I took said that everybody wants to do the model, nobody wants to clean the data. Because like running the model and doing the modeling, that's the fun part, but you can't get there. Like 80% of the work is actually in the data and the foundations. 20% is in the modeling, picking parameters, tuning things, experimenting there, but you can't get there and get a robust output of a model if your data foundations are erect.
And I have a question that may sound very simple, but I don't think it is. So what do you think about AI? Do you think that AI in general, not just in terms of LLMs, but in general, for a business company or also for us as people, is more a revolution or evolution?
I guess it depends on where your business starts with it, right? So I think for businesses that have mature processes with their data already, that have strong data foundations in place, strong governance around data as well as infosec, I think that for them, it's an evolution. But I think if you're maybe a smaller business still working from spreadsheets, the concept of a data warehouse is even foreign to you, right? Then it's going to be a revolution for you. So I really do think it just depends on kind of where you're starting from. I think that the biggest gains that AI are bringing to the market were down to startups. I really do. I think that being a startup now and how fast you can scale and how fast you can just scale operations and operations you put in place for your startup is so much more accelerated now versus then say even 5 years ago, just because the capability of the tools, the capability of what the AI models can enable for you as well as agents that's pretty revolutionary, I think, for startups as well.
Curiosity. Maybe because I'm biased because I was documenting myself about what you share, what you are saying lately. And I saw that you are sharing a lot, at least lately, about news about Anthropic and Claude. So is it correct for me to think that Anthropic is your preferred model?
I would say yes, but it also depends, right? I'm going to say it depends, everyone. That'll resonate. Depends. So what I really appreciate about Anthropic is how they're approaching model development, how they approach model alignment, and how seriously they take safety of the models and what they put out into the world. So just from like an ethical and responsible AI standpoint, the work that Anthropic does really resonates with me. But I also find that Claude is the best thought partner. I test all of the models all of the time. I use Claude, I use ChatGPT, I use Copilot, I use Gemini, I use Perplexity, I use everything. And I like to periodically, like if I'm thinking about something and I'd like to research something, I'll use all of them. And I pay for all of the models too. So I'm using the pro version. So I'll give them all the same prompt because not only do I want to see how they approach it and what they return, I want to see where there's agreement across the information delivered. If it's something where the subjectivity of the response could be high, and meaning I could rely less on it being accurate. So I'd like to see like where's their agreement on something that is more fact based than idea based, right? But as a kind of as a thought partner, I just really appreciate I appreciate the output from Claude, and it much better, as well as doing deep research. I found like for really going deep on a topic, what you get out of Claude tends to be more robust. That's been my experience, but it could also vary by like what I'm looking at and researching versus what somebody else is. I think ChatGPT is great for example, if I in my work at LinkedIn, I work with a couple of different Tiger teams as well as the women at ERG. I think you mentioned that at the top. And so part of that is creating a newsletter. And whenever I'm looking at articles that I want to summarize and have a digest for in a given newsletter, I find that if I give that to ChatGPT to summarize, it produces a better, more engaging output. Claude is much more thoughtful and like kind of like almost like asking a PhD student to do something versus asking your college radio dorm mate or something, right? It's just a different tone that gets output. So I appreciate them for different things. And then when it comes to coding, I've actually found that using Codex with VS Code has produced kind of better, more optimized code in using Cursor or using even Copilot. Sometimes I find that the code that is produced is unnecessarily complex. And so there's a lot of back and forth with it that then tends to reduce the gains you'd be getting if you just did it yourself. If that makes sense. So again,
Yes.
I think they're all good for a lot of different reasons. As far as image generation, like when I needed to make an avatar of me for something, and I was like, here's me, but avatar, comic book, Wonder Woman, right? Like that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And like I gave it to Nano Banana, Google's thing, and it was like, there you go. And it was perfect first time out, nothing weird looking instantly. So I think for that use case, I would probably use Nano Banana. So it just depends.
Yeah, depends on the need you use the model that you think it's better. And talking about these, for instance, but talking more about the company, it's more about the strategy, especially the two big companies. So Google and OpenAI are using or have established, at least in my perception, is Google is going very, let's say, granular. So Gemini is the big model, but then exist dozens of different types of sub Gemini, let's call it so. The ones that we see for research, even if for research itself, there are three different types of Gemini
Yeah.
because one is a mode, one is a review, and one is web guide. They are not the same one. But then we have the specific Gemini for medical, the specific Gemini for specific niche. So seems to be like the strategy that Google is trying to follow it to pursue. So in order to try to offer the best solution for specific needs. Instead, OpenAI seems more like the generalistic, and at least from what it seems to me. So what do you think is the best way, the best strategic way for the famous AI war?
So actually what OpenAI is doing with the release of GPT-5 on the back end, it's taking the prompt and rewriting it and then routing it to the correct agent, routing it to the correct model, if you will, where it interprets it's going to have the best output. Also, not everything, it kind of goes back to the monster truck analogy, right? Like not everything needs to get an output from like a big, huge generalized LLM. If you've got a specialized LLM that's been fine tuned to produce really efficient code, then routing a code based question to that model makes so much sense, right? It's going to be more efficient and it's going to have a higher degree of accuracy. So they're also doing that. I just don't think that's necessarily transparent to the user.
I see, I see. Yeah, I think it's maybe more a communication, how they communicate things. And yes, us SEO usually tend to be very paranoid with Google, always with our team foil. And for instance, something that sometimes surprising me is how much the word of SEO is saying Google now before with the classic zero click. Now with AI overview, so Google is stealing all our traffic. And I will see the same between brackets rage when talking about OpenAI, for instance, saying ChatGPT never sent any traffic actually. But people are not so angry with ChatGPT. They are crazy for being cited and linked by ChatGPT, even if
I think it's the expectation that's been set, right? And which that's another thing that I've always, like, from the beginning thought was strange in SEO, that thinking Google owes you traffic. Google doesn't owe you traffic. If you don't want to provide your information to Google, you don't have to. Recognizing that it is a valuable traffic stream is one thing, and playing along with them because you would like that traffic is another. But at the end of the day, they don't owe anybody traffic, right? They owe
Yeah.
their users of their product, good information. Like, that's their promise has always been, we will provide you good information that we have found out in the world. And when they cease to provide that, they will lose users. And so that's the business they're in. They're not in the business of, like, providing everybody traffic and making SEOs happy. They're in the business of making their searchers happy. And that's just never been something that SEOs have been happy about, especially as search features change and traffic distributions change. So I've always thought it's a strange dynamic that was set up. And I wonder if if they could rewind the clock, would Google still set in motion the relationship with the community that they did by providing a lot of information and providing a lot of answers, right? Because to your point, nobody expects somebody from OpenAI to say, I'm going to tell you how this all works. Here's our manual. Do you know what I mean? Whereas there's definitely that expectation from the reps from Google. And I've just always found that odd. Like, you would never expect, like, Ford to tell you, like, how they manufactured their carburetor for your car or whatever. You just get in your car and drive and you're happy it works. So I just think it's strange. Yeah.
Yes, in fact, I always have this sort of, like you, this sort of odd sensation. And I think that maybe this sort of expectation our community of SEO always had about Google, Google is retaining our traffic, when actually it's not. It want to retain its own traffic. That's why for many years now, I always used Google as it was my best tool for understanding what people search. And I love SEO tools because they make our life easier. I mean, we are hosted by Advanced Web Ranking with this podcast, wonderful tool. You recently took a spotlight, promoted and produced by SEMrush, another fantastic tool. There are a lot of tools fantastic, but the best tool is Google. And maybe it's not even Google Search Console, it's the same Google search interface. Because just knowing, seeing how Google is trying to retain user on Google is giving you hints about what is the search journey that Google has understood this person are going to do or going to work. So I think sometimes, okay, blame Google, but try to use the same, let's say, the same weapons that Google is using, tricks Google is using to make people stay on Google to understand what you have to be visible, how,
I
where
mean,
you have
build a
to.
brand and you don't have to rely on Google, right?
No, right, right. But I think if you want your brand to be visible on Google,
Yeah.
normally you know that Google is pushing, let's say, from this search, I know I'm pushing to this related search or to this potential question that I know that you are asking when you're searching or something like this. So you can map
Yeah.
the potential search journey. So if you map it, not literally, but in how the famous micro moments are included inside Google search, then you can see, okay, where I'm failing as a brand to be present. So
Yeah.
you can adjust.
Yeah, I would agree. I would also say that your best source of data is always going to be first party data, right? So your log
Also,
files and your demographic information about your site visitors, about the people that buy your products. I mean, that's always going to be your very best source of data. And focusing more on that and what you can understand about your first party data, and then how you can scale that out to other platforms across, not just Google, but what do you, if your audience are avid cyclists, right? If you have let's say you sell a weird product that you don't think of as a cycling product, but it turns out a lot of cyclists buy this product for some strange reason that only cyclists know about. what are you doing to engage that community, right? Do you even realize that's happening? And then are you going to the places where cyclists go, to the forums, to the subreddits, things like that? And are you advertising there? Are you getting your brand in front of people in other avenues instead of just like kind of winging a prayer that Google's gonna provide all the traffic you need? I think we just have to be a lot more creative than we have been, because I think that the distribution of traffic and how users, I mean, it's been changing forever, right? It always changes. There's the first big change, I think, was when social hit the scene and everybody was like, oh, now it's all social media. That's what we need to focus on. And it's never that you need to focus on one thing. That's why it's hard, right? You have to focus on all the things, because the reality is customers are everywhere. Customers are using TikTok, or they're using Instagram, or they're not using any of those and they're only on Reddit, right? So it's tricky to understand where your customers are and how you can reach them where they are. And it's going to be a lot of places. It's not just going to be one.
Yeah, yeah. So you have to be ubiquitous so somehow. Then
Yes,
you
you do.
and
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. And talking about the fading traffic, as recently as Spotlight, you were in a panel with publishers
Mhm.
and talking about the, let's say, love and date relationship that publisher have with AI. Because love can be because AI can be them in their daily work, actually. But then AI is also hatred because it's especially for publishers who are not in the news, because still now the news are somehow safe, because Google is, especially Google, but also Bing is saving the top news blog, for instance, from AI, etc., etc., etc. But publishers that are more like, let's go, doing a simple example. The National Geographic with its wonderful articles about destination or research or history, etc., etc., they are seeing their traffic somehow stolen by the instant answer. So coming back home, as you are now from the event, what did you brought to yourself after this panel? What is the perception you have about the situation that the publisher have
Yeah.
and the different discordant maybe thoughts the publisher have about AI?
I think that people realized the mistake that was made when everything went digital, right? So I think that especially large publishers learned that when the web came on, they should have been all in the beginning. And I feel like a lot of the larger publishers were dragged kicking and screaming to being digital and not print, because print was their world, right? And so now we're seeing another, and they lost ground, right? Because then Google became where people find their news instead of going directly to those publishers. I think that they learned from that. And I think that they're all taking different approaches. So, for example, you've got like the New York Times is suing OpenAI and Microsoft because so much of their historical information was used in training the models. I think that's fair. I think that any other work that was used to train these models, so the books, the authors, which Anthropic is settling with authors, if you've produced a book in the past number of years, I believe they've got a web page where you can go and you will get I'm going to say it wrong. You'll get paid for your work having been used if your work was part of that corpus of information used. So I think that there are model developers that recognize the debt that is owed to creators. I think that you see this not only in the news space, but in the creator space of art. I think it's a really turbulent time to be a creator producing art or knowledge. And I understand the frustration of the different publishers, and they're all taking a different approach. So New York Times is suing, blocking. The Economist is not suing, but are blocking. But they are primarily supported by their subscriptions. They're a really heavy subscription model. So they haven't noticed an impact with the rollout of all of the LLMs, because again, their focus has been on creating their brand and a very large subscriber base. And the Financial Times is kind of in the middle. They've got a licensing agreement with OpenAI, and they're working with the other LLMs as well, because they realize that they do depend on showing up as a resource, because just showing up there helps to drive subscriptions to their subscribers as well. So I think it's just going to depend on what your business model is. And I think that the publishers that have strong relationships with their subscriber base or their readership are going to be in a better position going forward, regardless of whether they choose to block or not block the models from absorbing their content, or if they're able to come to some sort of licensing agreement. I just think it's unrealistic to assume that every publisher on the web is going to have a licensing agreement with all of the
Yeah, yes,
LLMs.
because I was
That's
thinking
just,
to the classic
yeah,
small publisher. I'm not saying a super independent, two people company
yeah,
publishing company, but I'm thinking also the classic small publisher, in a very niche area. Maybe they can have an agreement, because maybe if they were able during the year to own the space in that niche, they
yeah.
can be very interesting also for models, because they have the knowledge. They are the knowledge base for that niche thing.
Yeah,
But
but this
I
gets
still,
into what is your point of differentiation, right? So
yes,
there are 1,000 blogs, and there might be 10 that drive the news and information that the other 990 reproduce. Do you know what I
exactly,
mean? So it goes to
exactly.
original
It's the
content,
classic,
original news.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, the classic test that I also ask to my clients when they have a blog, for instance, not necessarily because they are a publisher, but because they are a brand, and let's say in fashion, that they have their magazine, because we
Yeah.
want to. It was clear that in the past it was a good way to attract certain type of inspiration or certain. And the classic things that I ask them is to go on every browser, and especially on mobile, and to search for something, and then I press to open this blog post, but in text mode only, without all the templates, so just reading the main content. And then I ask them, because usually I send them this screenshot, because if not, they are BS, because they already know what is a blog. And I put one of theirs and three of the competitors, and ask them to see, can you recognize your content? And many, many, many times they are not able, even if they are into the creative team, they don't recognize it.
Yeah. Yeah. So getting at what is that, I think the model developers will pay for certain like high quality sources they can trust, sources that they know are valid, sources that are valuable and will bring value to the users of their product, right? So
Mhm.
think of it in terms of partnerships that need to be developed. It was Gemini, right? It was Google that developed the partnership with Reddit, which was really
Yes,
smart. Like I don't know if that's exclusive, but I think it is. Keep me honest here, which
I
was
think
brilliant
I
on
think
their
it is.
part.
I think that maybe Reddit also had something similar with OpenAI,
Okay.
but then Google did it and was stronger. So it's something that maybe not exclusive, but really, really, really stronger than the OpenAI one, if I see the OpenAI one.
Yeah, I don't remember the the
Yeah.
the terms of the deal, but that was really smart because Reddit is a thriving platform that is constantly generating new information, new discussions, following the trends, right? So when you think about data changing over time, think about how language changes over time, what people are talking about, what's important when, right? And the signals that you can derive from that. So that was just a very, very, very smart deal to make. I don't know if there are other communities. So for example, if all of the big model developers are also focused on healthcare, right? So where is the best source of healthcare information, of good, valid, scientific healthcare information? I would suspect deals are being made in those areas as well. So I think that there is a way that people that are providing really good high quality information can benefit from what's happening. But I think you have to be one of those. And I just don't think there are going to be as many as there are publishers of this kind of information, right? And it kind of goes to think about the helpful content update that everybody was extremely unhappy with. Uh, just your face there. It begs the question of how many blogs for this given topic are required, right? I think it was at a PubCon or something. Gary Yesh was speaking, and he said that boiling an egg, you don't need 2,000 blog posts on how to boil an egg. There's really just a couple of instructions for boiling an egg, right? So, like, you don't even need to link out to something because the facts are the facts. There's nothing that changes about boiling an egg, right? And so I think about that kind of content versus what the most popular music artist of the day is. That's going to keep changing. You have to keep your eye on that because that's changing. Boiling an egg is sorted.
Yes, and that's why, for instance, in this case, Claude is very clear. Sometimes I like to ask to chatbots to say, what are the sources that you retrieve use for creating these? Because sometimes I want to have the real sources because to avoid the hallucination. And Claude is very clear in this. He says, I don't need any source because this is in my model because it's known facts. So I don't need to refresh the facts that are known. And sometimes this is something that people don't, in our same industry, niche, do not understand. And that's the big difference being of the answer generated by the training data and the fresh data. The
Yes.
training
Yes.
data is never linking to anything
Yes.
from my experience. But
Yes. Yeah. If
when
they're
it's
pulling it
doing,
direct
yes, when
from,
it's
if
doing
it's
real
directly
time
known.
search,
Yeah.
then yes,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
giving you a source.
Yeah. But I think that's really important too. People should always be grounding what they ask for with give me a source. Because especially if it's something that you need to have the right information, having a source and then actually looking at the sources provided, that's the trick too, right? Not just
Yes.
saying, give me a source, because as we've seen, they can hallucinate sources. And so I think if you ask for sources, validate those sources. There are times when I've been looking for information or ask a question and ask for sources. And I look at, like, this is where having brand authority actually really does matter. I see if the sources that are returned and I'm asking something that's relatively newsworthy, and they're all things that I've never heard of, right? News sources that I've never heard of. I ditch out and it's like, nope, I'm going to go to Google because if I want like valid sources, Google's not going to hallucinate a list of 10 links.
Yeah. Just a last question about AI and so on. We just touched this topic, this argument very briefly before. The need of strong ethic in all this work. Because if it's not, I mean, we are used to the jokes about AI ruling the world, but if we don't put the ethic, at the end of the day, everything can be good. If you don't put an ethic on an ethical layer to everything we are doing, especially in the field of AI. So where do you think that is lacking ethic in this AI industry?
That's a tough question because ethics and getting to establishing ethical guidelines, it's a really hard thing to do because ethics are contextual, right? In one scenario, this might be the ethical thing to do. In another scenario, this might be the ethical thing to do. And ethics can also be contextual by cultures, right? For certain cultures, this doing this thing is perfectly acceptable. In other cultures, it's completely unacceptable, right? And so you have to think about the context of any and how the context may change based on those kinds of things when you're thinking about applying like really strict guidelines and rules. So I think it's a very big challenge to say that it's entirely ethical or entirely unethical to produce this information in response to a query. And politics gets in the way a lot as well. And when you think about the kinds of information and output that a large portion of a population might agree is not okay. But you might have a minority of a population thinking that's perfectly okay. It's censorship if you don't. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So I think this is going to be an area that the model developers continue to struggle with, continue to iterate upon. And again, that's all of that layering on the ethics, layering on the alignment happens after the model's trained, right? So like once a model's trained, It'll answer anything. It'll give you any answer, give you any information, like, how to build a bomb. Here you go build this bomb. Then in the tuning and the post training, right? Tuning and alignment is where getting at where the really big problems are, right? So the ones that, like, we can all agree we don't want people knowing how to make bombs. We can all agree we don't want people knowing how to make viruses that could kill a population. So it's getting at those things first, right? Getting at the harm reduction. But I think that agreement on what is contextually and culturally ethical, I think that's much farther down the line and much harder to get to. So I think that the most that we can hope for are safe and harmless models. And then when you start talking about ethics, that's almost like talking about religion in a way, right?
Yes. It's something like this. It's somehow.
Now, I think that you can talk about the ethical use of AI, but when you talk about getting ethical replies out of an AI, that's two different things. And so,
Yeah.
the ethical application of AI, I think that there's a lot of really important work around that. I think when you talk about facial recognition, when you talk about using AI in credit scoring and hiring and things like that, I think then that's really important work and really important discussions to have, because again, the harm is coming from the application of the AI, not from the AI itself.
Yes, it's like in Blade Runner, where problems are not the machine, but
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
the machine are used.
Exactly. Yeah.
And talking about science fiction, so let's close the conversation about AI and search and everything like this. Let's talk about you. You are a big lover. We see DC beside you. We talk about Battlestar Galactica, but what I remember, you are really huge fan of the Star Trek, right? If you could, let's say that for some reason, strange reason, you disappear from your house and you appear in the Star Trek universe, what character would you would like to be in the Star
Oh,
Trek universe?
oh gosh. I have honestly never thought I'd be that character, right? I've always thought about more of like which ship would I want to serve on, right?
Okay,
Which crew would I want to be a part of, more so
more
than
than
like
lower decks
which
than a
Oh,
main
Lower Decks is so
more.
much fun. Lower Decks is a lot of fun, actually. I could be her. I would only serve under Picard because I think you'd get killed on any other ship. So I think your likelihood of survival and ethical choices being made are higher on Picard's Enterprise than on any of the other captains' enterprises. So I would go with being part of Picard's crew in whatever role.
That's
Probably
cool. That's
Troy.
cool.
Probably Troy. Yeah. But I don't know. They're all a lot of fun. It's hard to choose one.
And talking about um, science fiction, I don't know, because I see a lot of reference to comics, to series, to movies. What about books?
Oh gosh, books. So that's interesting. So, like, if I had to pick a favorite fiction book, it would be To Kill a Mockingbird for sure. But mostly I read nonfiction. I'm unfortunately a nerd that way. I read a lot of cognitive science. I keep up on cognitive science, ethics, research, issues around the implications and applications of technology to society. So I approach everything from a socio-technical lens, and all of my reading tends to support that. There were a couple of years where all I read were textbooks when I was doing my master's program. It was a lot of coding and machine learning and books around that. So I didn't have a lot of time for other things. But those are the books that I tend to read regularly. I'm reading a lot recently about kind of the impact of big tech overall on society and what we're seeing. A really good book that I would suggest for everyone. Yeah, it's Nexus by
Oh
Yuval
yes,
Harari. It's really, I think that would help set a lot of people up for kind of understanding the moment we're in. And I appreciate the historical lens he gives to technological revolutions, especially around knowledge.
yeah, yes, I like it too. And very, very last question: you what more than your brain, more your gut? What your gut is hinting you? What is going to be the next things that people should pay attention to in our field?
That is very difficult. So in our field, do you mean in the field of like digital marketing,
Yes,
or
in digital
what do you mean
marketing.
in digital marketing? Oh, I think that going back to basics, I think that really understanding that traditional marketing still works. And the more you can learn about that, I would highly suggest people also understand paid advertising. That I know that's an anathema to SEOs sometimes, but I
Yes.
think that if your job is to build audience and customers for your clients, then you would be remiss not to be investigating all of the channels that are available and stop focusing so much on Google, diversify that pie because, and that's always like, I think, oh gosh, was it like 2013? I think I did a presentation where I was like, if your brand is relying 70% on Google and 30% on Facebook for all of your traffic, you don't actually have a brand. You need to diversify that pie so that if something changes in one of those platforms, you're not heavily impacted. And I think what we've seen historically throughout in our industry is the over reliance on a single channel. So I would suggest that everyone stop and focus on like the wider distribution because again, I don't know anybody that lives on Google except SEOs that's the only place they care about. Like people in the real world, just start talking to normies, start talking to people that don't live in the world we live
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
and find out where they get their information from and how can you be in front of those people in those other spaces.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. It was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much for having me and it was so good to see you again. It's been too long.
Yes, yes. And let's do a promise to ourselves. Let's see in the future, maybe a new conversation and see what
Yeah,
happened in the middle.
I'd love that.
Okay. Thank you. And thanks to all of you. Remember, this is my, let's say, creator moment. Ring on the bell to be always notified about new episodes and help us growing, subscribing to a channel. Thank you and bye bye.